Welcome to Chapter 1, Introduction to HTML. In this section we're going to discuss what HTML is, what it's used for, and we're going to discuss some of the core concepts of HTML, including tags, other elements, as well as attributes and styling. Okay, so what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the language that your browser reads. Whether you're using Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all browsers read HTML pretty much in the same way. One thing that can be misunderstood is that HTML is not a programming language. A programming language allows you to describe some sort of process or calculation. HTML is more of a way of adding context and structure to text and other content. It's physical. It doesn't perform calculations. The World Wide Web Consortium creates the standards of HTML. There's HTML, XHTML, XML. This series is going to focus on HTML5, which is the newest version. Alright, so the syntax of HTML is pretty simple. It's fairly easy to learn, and I'm sure some of you already know this stuff. But HTML uses a set of tag elements, and the idea is to wrap the content in the tag, and the tag will then format the content how you want it to look. For instance, here we have, this is a heading wrapped in an H1 tag, which is a heading tag. So this would be, by default, it would be a large heading. And this is a paragraph, would just be standard paragraph text. Now you can change the size and the look of the headings and paragraphs through CSS, but your browser also has a default setting, a default font size for headings and paragraphs. So this is a standard, probably the most simple website you'll ever see, but it is actually a complete HTML document. So what I'll do is go through this, what we have here. First of all, we have the doc type, and it's very important that the doc type is the first element on the page. This is not a tag. The doc type is not a tag. What it does is it's an instruction to the web browser about what version of HTML the page is written in. If this was XHTML, you'd have something different here. You'd have the XHTML doc type. So that should always be number one. Next we have the opening HTML tag, which obviously we need. It's the top tag always. I don't think you'd ever have anything above that aside from the doc type. And next we have the head, and inside the head we have the page title. We have the opening title tag, the title, and then the closing tag. Now the page title would usually show up on either the tab of the browser when you're on a specific page, or in the top bar of the browser. This wouldn't be displayed only in the actual inner page, but this is very important, mostly for SEO reasons, for search engines, because this is what shows up when your site pops up in Google or Bing. So it's important to optimize these titles, but that's beyond the scope of this tutorial. And next we have the closing head tag, and after the head we have the body, which is obviously the main content of any website. And obviously in this we only have just a small paragraph. Obviously there'd be a lot more in here. We just have a hello world wrapped up in a paragraph tag, just for show. And then we have the closing body tag, and then finally we have the closing HTML tag. So all HTML tags are either block elements or inline elements, and I'll explain this a little more when we actually build our web page. But basically, a block level element, it creates a block of content. It creates a new line before and after it. An example of a block element would be a paragraph. Now if you have a paragraph, if you have text wrapped in a paragraph, then there won't be anything before that on that line or after that on that line. It starts a new line always. Now H1 through H6 headings also are block elements. Forms, You have div tags, which are block level. All of these would create a new line, which I'll explain more when we're actually doing our project. Alright, so inline elements, they don't create new lines like a block level element would. So you can have, say, an A tag, which is an inline element, run alongside of another A tag, and there would be no space, there'd be no line break in the middle. They could be on the same line. So that's an inline level element. We have the A tags. The bold tag is an inline element. Input tags. And input tags actually don't have a closing tag, which I'll explain very soon. Span tags are also inline. So all tags have attributes, or can have attributes. And there's a number of different kinds of attributes. We could have the width or height as an attribute, the style, and as we have here, the href attribute, which is a URL. And most attributes, if not all, are in a name value pair separated with an equal sign. So here we can see the attribute name is href and the value is http google.com, which is the link. And just like before, we have the text wrapped in an A tag, which is a link tag, and we have the text Google. So what this would look like in the browser would just be the word Google, and you could click on it and it would be a link. So attributes, they basically just provide additional information about a tag or an element. And attributes are always specified in the start tag. They're never put in the back, in the ending tag. So we have some other common attributes. The style attribute is a big one. The style attribute will allow us to design the layout and the look of our page, of certain elements on the page. And here we have an example. We have a p tag, which is a paragraph tag. Wrapped around the text, this paragraph will be red. And we have the style attribute, which is the name, and then we have the value, which is color red. Now this is a selector. This is a style selector color. There's many different kinds. There's background color, there's width, height. We'll get into that in a later section. And here we have the ID and class attributes, which will allow us to select a certain element, and these are usually used either for JavaScript or CSS. If you have an external style sheet, you can connect an ID or a class to an element. Here we have the p tag and we have the ID my paragraph. So we could style this in a CSS style sheet by just defining this ID and then the properties we want to attach to it. The title attribute, it just adds extra info about the element or tag. And this, in most new browsers, will be displayed as a tooltip if you hover over it. Like right here, we have a link and we have the title, click to go to some site. So this would be a link, and when you hover over the link, a tooltip would pop up and say click to go to some site. Singleton tags are tags that do not have a closing tag. They can also be called void elements. An example of a singleton tag would be the image tag, the img tag. This right here, img open tag, img close tag, is wrong. Only the opening img is needed. And this is usually used, or always used, with attribute only tags such as image. They can use a trailing slash in HTML. If you're writing XHTML, then the trailing slash is required for it to be valid. But HTML, HTML5, you do not need it. It's usually not used, but it doesn't hurt your document if you do use it. And here we have some examples of tags without a trailing slash. We have the line break, the horizontal line, image, command, and this is what they would look like with the trailing slash. And once again, if you're using XHTML, which is not covered in this tutorial, this is how you would do it. So images on an HTML page are defined by the image tag, the img tag. And as we talked about in the last slide, the image tag is empty aside from its attributes. There's no content in between, and there's no ending tag. It's strictly just the img with the attributes. And the most important attribute which is needed is the source attribute, which is abbreviated src. And what this does is it points to the physical location of the image you want to display. And you could use an absolute path like this, which is the entire URL, or you could use a relative path depending on where your HTML file and your image file is on your server. And another needed attribute is the alt tag. Let me just make this lowercase. The alt tag, what it does is gives it a text title. It differs from the title tag, as it's not a tooltip. When you hover, it doesn't hover over as a tooltip. But what it does is, if your image is not found, say your image isn't there where it should be, this will display. So say you have a logo. You might have a logo on your web page, but if for some reason the server can't find the logo image, you could actually just have your company name as the alt tag, so that it would display the name as opposed to just being blank or anything like that. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about is separating and styling your HTML. You can style your elements with the style attribute, which is what we're going to do in this chapter. Next chapter we're going to introduce CSS, which is cascading style sheets, where we would have an external file to do all the styling, selectors, and so forth. CSS is actually preferred, but for this tutorial, for simplicity, we're just going to use the inline style attribute. And what we can use to separate certain blocks of HTML, we can use the div tag or the span tag. And the biggest difference between these is the div is a block level element and span is inline. And here we have an example. We're using the div tag and we're using the style attribute, and then we have the selectors and the values. So we have padding, which is 5 pixels. We're going to have, first of all, what we have here is an H1 heading and a paragraph. Very simple. And it's wrapped in the div tag with padding of 5 pixels, a background color of black, and color of white. So what this means is this block right here, first of all, is going to have a padding of 5 pixels. So it's going to have 5 pixels on each side of it, a space with 5 pixels on each side. And the background color of the entire div will be black. And the color is actually the text color. So the H1 in the paragraph will be white text. And I'm going to get into this very soon when we start our first project, our first small web page. So here are some common style attribute selectors. As I showed you in the last slide, we can have the color selector of red, which would make the text red. Background color, make it blue. Background image, we could actually have an image as the background, and you would just put the location of the image, either absolute or relative. Padding, 5 pixels, which is the space around it. And margin is similar to padding, but there is a difference, and I'll get into that in a later section. And display block, we could also have display inline, we could have display none, which would hide it altogether. And here we have some border selectors, border style, color, and width. Now there's a shorthand way to do this. We don't need to have 3 selectors here. We can actually have one called border, and then just add the values of each of the style, the color, and the width. So we've covered the basics of HTML syntax and the tag structure. In the next section, we're going to create a project that'll implement all the techniques that we've learned through this section. Alright, so now that we've discussed the basics of HTML, I want to actually jump in and get our hands dirty a little bit and do some HTML programming. You'll see here I've created a small project, and it's just a single web page with all the elements that we've talked about, a heading, paragraph, image tags, styling, title, page layout. So we're going to jump into this now, and you should have these files. You should have the project files, and this is actually located in chapter 1, section 1, and this here, fave pick done, is the finished product. And right now we're just going to recreate this. Now, one of the things that we need to discuss is the editor that you're going to use, which is extremely important. You should use something that you're comfortable with. But for HTML and CSS, we don't need any complicated environments. We could actually use just Notepad, standard Notepad. What I would recommend is Notepad++. It just offers a little more developer-friendly tools to use. So you can download that. Just Google Notepad++. I'm not sure the actual URL, but it's free and it's really easy to use. So that's what I'm going to use for this particular series. Alright, so what I want to do now is create a new file. Let me close this out. I want to create a new file to work with. Now you'll see we have the fave pick done HTML file. I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it index.html. Let me just do that real quick. Oops. Save as, and you should save the project before you even start. So I'm going to save it to the same folder, chapter 1, section 1, and we're going to name it index.html. So the reason for this, naming it index.html, is so that you don't have to actually type the file name in the browser. So if we had mysite.com/favepick, if we don't want to specify favepickdone.html, then if we name it index.html, the page will load. It automatically loads index.html. So that's why I'm naming this. I mean, it's just, if it's going to be the actual page that you want to load automatically, then you want to name it index.html. So now I want to start the actual code. So we have index.html. Now what we want to do now is just open the index.html in the browser. So I'm going to open it with Chrome, and you can use IE or Firefox or whichever your preference. And the first thing that I want to do, that we have to do in any HTML document, is define the doc type. So we just want to define the doc type, and we want HTML. If we were using XHTML or something else, this would be different, and XHTML doc types are a lot longer as well. So that's the first thing always. And the second thing will be the HTML opening tag. Now you can type as you go the tags, or you can do what I like to do and just close every tag you make, every opening tag, close it right away. That way you don't have any errors, any mistakes in the format. And the next thing we want to do is the head. So we want to open the head tag and close it. And in the head tag, we can do a lot of different things. You can have meta tags, keywords, all kinds of scripts or links to CSS or JavaScript files. But in this project, all we're going to have in the head is the title. So open it, close it. And sometimes I'll leave it on the same line if it's going to be a short amount of content in the tag. So for the title, we're just going to have favorite pick. Now I'm going to save this and go back to the browser, and this is the index HTML page, you can see, and reload, and you'll see there's nothing in the inner area here. That's because our content that we have right here is in the head, and in the head is the title, and the title shows up here in the browser bar. I mean in the browser tab. The title is very important for SEO reasons. If you want to, rank well in the search engines, the title is what people will see when you come up in the results. So I mean that's a whole different topic altogether, but just something to know. So what I want to do now is I want to view the source. This is the browser page, the presentation page. I want to view the source through the browser, which could be different depending on which browser you're using. I'm using Chrome. In Chrome you go to Tools and then View Source, and you'll see it's the same thing, and it shows the raw HTML. So it's really good if you want to troubleshoot and if you missed some closing tags or anything like that. So we're just going to leave that open, and then we're going to continue to add HTML to our document. So after the head, we need to have a body. So opening body tag, closing body tag. Now the body is this, is the inner browser. And what we're going to do now is we're going to add a heading tag, an H1 tag. Now I think I mentioned this, but heading tags go H1 through H6, and H1 being the largest, H6 being the smallest. So we're going to have a heading, and we're going to call it favorite pick, just like the title. Close it, save. I'm pressing Control S to save, just so you know. Now to reload, and there's our H1 tag. And the size of this is determined by the browser because we have no style attached to it, no custom style. So in most of the browsers, it's about the same size, H1 through H6. So next we're going to add the paragraph, and if it's a paragraph or something that has a lot of content, I usually have it on its own line. So I put the paragraph here, and you can see how I'm indenting. Inner tags have an indent. So for the paragraph, let's see, and you can just write anything here. It's not, the content's not really important, it's just the format that we're looking at. It's bright and strong. Alright, so that's in the paragraph tags. I'm going to save, reload, and there's our paragraph. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is add the image. And the image is a singleton tag, as I explained earlier. So it doesn't have a closing tag. We're just going to have the IMG, and the main attribute is source, which points to the image file, wherever that may be. For us, it's actually in the same directory as the HTML file, so we don't have to use any folders or anything like that. So we're just going to put the name of the pic, which is favepik.jpg. Now if you had a folder here called images, and you had the image in the folder, then you would add the images folder to the file name, to the source. And the next thing we want to add to the image tag is the alt, and I'm just gonna put my favorite pick, and then we close it. We don't close, I mean we close the head tag, the beginning tag. There is no ending tag like this. That's wrong. And if this was XHTML, which it's not, we would add the slash like that. So we'll save that, Control S, save, reload, and then we have the image. So as far as markup, as content, we're pretty much done. What we want to do now is separate the parts we want to style and add the selectors, the CSS, to whatever we want to add it to. The first thing I'm going to do is take basically everything and wrap it in a div. So I'm going to put a div right here, an opening div tag, and then a closing one after the image, because this will give us a div tag with everything you see inside of it. And I'm going to do some indenting just to make it more presentable. So we have all that wrapped in a div. I'm going to save it, and you won't see any changes yet because there's no style attached to it. It's just a tag. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is add style to the body. So we're going to add a style attribute. And, excuse me, I need to drink some water. So for the style, we're going to add a margin. We're going to cut the margin out because automatically it adds margin to the body. You can see here it's not flush up against the browser. So we're just going to put margin 0, save. I'll reload, and now you'll see it's flush up against the edges. The next style property I want to do is the background color of the entire body. So we're going to do the background color selector, and we're going to make it gray. Save, reload, and now we have the entire body is gray. And now I want to make this text, I want to change the color of the text to make it white. So we're just going to use color. Now I could just do white, that works. I'll save and reload. But if you want to, usually if you want a more specific color, you would use the hexadecimal value for it as opposed to just writing the color, because I mean there's only so many colors available as text. So if you want, right here I'm going to use the hexadecimal value for white, which is 6 Fs, and I'll save it, reload, and it's white. Now I could change this to the black hexadecimal value, which is 6 zeros, save, and it's black. And then there's others like 6 Cs is light gray, but we're going to keep it white. Okay, so now what we want to do is style the we want to add some style to the div, which is the entire thing, the entire page. And the only style we're going to give to that is going to be a width of 750 pixels. And the reason I chose 750 pixels is because that's how big the image is. So I want the whole thing to end where the edge of the image is. Now I'll save that and reload, but we won't see any changes because we didn't add anything except the width. And now what we want to do is add to the heading. We want to add style to the H1 tag, and we want to zero out the margin just like we did to the body. I'll reload, and you'll see now there's no top space. And I do want to add a padding. Actually, I'll do the background color first. So the background color of the heading is going to be a hexadecimal value for a purplish color, which will be 53324D. Semicolon. You always need a semicolon in the middle separating the selectors. Save, reload, and then you'll see we have the background for the H1 tag. Excuse me. Now what we want to do is add padding to this, because you'll see the H1 tag doesn't have much space. It has almost no space between the edge of the purple and the heading text. So I'm going to add a padding of 5 pixels. Save, reload. Now you'll see it looks much better. There's more space and it looks much more clean. Now the difference between padding and margin, I can show you right now, is that padding is from the edge of the text here, the edge of the text to the top of the div. That's the padding. Margin would be from the edge of the div out. So let me just show you if I added a margin of 30 pixels, save, a margin of 30 pixels to the heading, you'll see it's from the outer edge out. Padding, I'll just add 35 just to show you. Padding is the inner spacing. So that's the difference between margin and padding. Let's set those back. Okay, so the next thing will be the paragraph. And you can see there's a lot of space between the paragraph. I want to margin that out. I want to zero out that margin as well. Save, reload. Oh, I forgot the style attribute. Haven't done that in a long time. Reload, and now you see the margin's gone. I do want to add a background color of black. I'll use the hexadecimal value. Reload. What's going on here? Oh, quote has to be on the end. Save, reload. Now we have a black background. Now I do want to add a little bit of padding to that too, so I'll do padding 5 pixels and save, reload, and now we have the padding. So it's really taken shape, and we did it in a very small amount of code. And next we'll be talking about tables and lists. Welcome to section 3. Section 3, we're going to be talking about lists and tables. So what are HTML tables? The tables are very similar to an Excel or other spreadsheet type of document. Tables are a great way to organize data into a tabular form. Tables help you see and process a great deal of information in a summary that's readable and efficient. Tables are also a great method to compare and contrast different types of data. Now, at one time, tables were used for the design and layout of web pages, which is now considered very bad practice. You should use CSS to format any type of design or layout. Anything like sidebars, headers, footers should all be done using CSS styling. Okay, so here I've created the basic building blocks of a table. This is the bare minimum. There are some other tags such as T-head, T-body, T-footer if you want prominent headings in each row and so forth. But this is what's needed to produce a table. And you'll see it uses HTML tag syntax just like everything else we've discussed. I have an image here that represents what this code would display on a web page. So you'll see at the top we have the opening table tag and the closing table tag at the bottom, and in between there we have some TR tags, which is table row. Okay, now we have 3 sets of table row tags, and we have 3. I apologize for this being off center. It's just a quick representation. So you'll see we have 3 table rows, 1, 2, 3, and in each table row we have 3 TD tags, which is a table column, but TD stands for table data. I know it would be more helpful if it was TC, but it's TD. So you can see here we have 3 columns as well. So that's pretty much the basic building blocks that you need to create an HTML table. And in the next project we'll be doing more advanced tags and syntax. So now let's talk about lists. Lists are used to group together related pieces of information, which tables also do. Lists are recommended for smaller amounts of data. If you have hundreds and hundreds of records, then a table would definitely be the way to go. If you want to display, I don't know, a list of websites on your site, then you would use a list. Lists are also good for ranking data, We have unordered lists, and then we have ordered lists, which include the numbers. Each item would have a number, so it works out well for ranking data, different types of data. Lists are also used for design and layout formatting. A list, most of the time, it's probably 90% of the time, a web developer will use a list for a menu. Most menus you see are unordered lists or even ordered lists. Even the menus that are horizontal, they're just styled to look a certain way. So lists work out very well for design and layout formatting. Even images, a lot of times I'll have a set maybe of 3 images I want displayed across a website, and I'll put each image inside of a list, and I'll just float it, and it's a nice horizontal layout of images. So it can be used for many different types of layout and formatting. So here we have a layout of the list syntax, which is very simple. It's a lot easier than a table. There's a lot less to it. So we have 2 types of lists here. We have an unordered list and an ordered list. And the only difference between these two is an ordered list has numbers and an unordered list has bullets. You can remove them. You can remove the bullets through CSS styling if needed. And it's pretty much it's pretty easy. There is one other type of list, which is a definition list, which allows descriptions for each item. I'm not going to get into that right now, but these are the most common. Well, unordered lists are the most common. This is what you would use for any kind of horizontal menu or anything like that. So in this section, I just want to go over what a form is and what the basic syntax of a valid HTML form is. Okay, so let's talk about what a form is and what it does. An HTML web form lets websites become interactive by allowing user input. So without forms, there's not too much we can do to actually talk to a website or to get feedback based on what we're looking for. Forms have front-end and back-end processing. Now, HTML takes care of the front end, and another language needs to take care of the back end. And that can be PHP, ASP. There's a number of server-side languages that'll process your form. HTML is used for a presentation only, an input only. It doesn't actually process the form. Now, forms include a series of HTML input tags and other elements. There's the text area tag, the select tag, the label tag, and we're going to go over those in this section. So we have the form tag, and like I said, it wraps around the entire form and all its elements. And the common attributes for a form tag would be the action. This would be an attribute of the form tag. It specifies the page or the script that would process the form, and this would be done on the server side. This wouldn't be HTML. What we would do would just be to define whatever file was to process the form. We would define that, so it could be, say, process.php, and that would be a file on your server that processes the form. Now, method is how the form gets processed, and I'm not going to really go over this here because it's out of scope. For instance, in PHP, you have the get and the post method. The get would send the information through the URL, and the post method would send it through the form, and it would be you wouldn't be displayed in the URL. But that's something else. That's server-side scripting. But these are the 2 most common attributes for a form tag. So next we have the input tag, and the input tag is one of the most important elements of a form, and there's multiple different types. The first attribute we have here is type, and that could be text, password, it could be a checkbox, radio button, submit button. There's multiple different types of input tags. Now the next attribute we have here is one that would probably show up on all of the fields. if the form was going to be processed somewhere else. If it was going to be processed with PHP, it would have a name, and that name is how you would identify that element in the script that it gets processed in. So, and it can also be used in client side. It can be used with JavaScript, validation. It can be used for numerous things. Next we have the size, which will specify the width of the input field, usually a text field. It would define the width in characters. So if you wanted it 50 characters long, the attribute would be size 50. The max would be the maximum amount of characters allowed, and you can set this to 1 to whatever, 500. So these are the most common attributes used on this particular tag. So the input tag is not the only field we can use for user input. Text area is another one, and a text area tag is used for a large block of text, and this would be maybe a comments field or a message field on a contact form, which I'll be showing you in the project for this section. And the text area tag takes the name attribute just like the input and pretty much the rest of the input type tags, and it has a rows and a calls attribute, and the rows would specify the length, the number of lines, which would be the length, the rows of the text area, and the calls would specify the visible width, so it would be the number of vertical columns. Now we have the max length attribute, which would specify the maximum number of characters allowed in the text area. This is just like the max attribute for the input tag that we just talked about. So those are the basic attributes for the text area tag. And here we have the select tag, and the select tag is used for drop-down type fields. It can be single. It's the single arrow that you click, and a drop-down will show, and you'll select one. Or it could be the kind where it's a list of multiple options, and you can hold Shift or Control and select multiple options. And it takes the name attribute just like all the other input fields. And if you want it to be the kind of drop-down where you can actually select more than one, then you would have the multiple attribute. And it also has the size attribute, which would specify the maximum of visible options. This would probably be used on the multiple type of drop-down. If they only wanted you to pick maybe 2 out of the 5 options or something like that. So that's the select tag. Alright, so next we have the label tag, and the label tag is a form element, but it's not a user input element. It's used to associate a field's heading with the input field. So you might have something like first name, just the text first name, and then maybe the input tag directly after it. And what this will do, if you wrap that text in a label, it will associate that text with the form, with the input field. So if you click on the text, it'll actually highlight the input field that text belongs to. And it takes the for attribute, which will just specify which form element the label is. And this would match up with the input element's name attribute. The last form related element we're going to talk about is the field set tag, and it's used to group together different input fields. Here we have an example. You'll see we have the name field set. This is just the field set open tag, and then you'd have the input fields, and then you'd close it. And this would be the sports field set, so you'd open the field set tag, add that whatever, it can be input boxes, check boxes, radio, and then you just close the field set. And that would, by default, your browser will most likely draw this border around it with the label of the field set here. And as far as attributes, we have the name, just like any other form field. The form, which would just specify the name of the form, and then we have a disabled attribute, and this would just disable all the fields within a certain field set. So now I think we're ready to dive into our project and implement all these form elements that we've talked about